It's my great pleasure to welcome you to George Washington University for this very important set of deliberations around open access to scholarly resources. This has been a very important issue at GW. We did pass an open access resolution through our faculty senate in February of 2015. I arrived here in July of 2013, and that was a top priority for me, and I let the Faculty Senate Libraries Committee know this is where we're going to focus. So we were very pleased when that did pass, and that the community then began to embrace open access and also more fully understand what it really meant. Our faculty, our researchers, our graduate students, and others are actively doing research in groundbreaking new areas, just as at many of your own institutions. There's a lot of funding that's coming from federal agencies as well as private foundations, all expecting this research to be openly available to the public. So the open access mandates that have come down from these funding agencies do make it very clear that there is this expectation. In addition to the actual research that's being funded with this expectation, we have our researchers, our faculty, our graduate students doing not only the research, but the peer review to ensure that the publications that are coming out of this research are rigorous and that the results are verifiable in significantly advancing our knowledge in society. That's all to say that there's a lot going into the research that's happening. There's funding from the agencies, there's significant resources going towards our faculty, staff, and researchers at our institutions because this is all important. It's important, therefore, that the public does have access to this knowledge that we're creating and that it is fully reviewed by these subject matter experts. The challenges we face are making sure that those same researchers can access that knowledge that they have created. And we are dealing with constant subscription level increases in our journals, especially our STEM journals, at a significant rate every year. Our budgets cannot keep pace with that. At GW Libraries, we do not get a significant increase. We get really no increase in our collections budget each year, which then, with the level of increases we see in scholarly journals, results in having to cut. And this is not only a disadvantage to the community, but it slows the knowledge creation, it slows the research, it slows what can be done. So moving forward without open access, especially when we have so much energy and so many resources being devoted to that by our own existing community, this is very important to see this happening. In addition to its open access policy, GW is committed to supporting openness in more broad directions as well, and we're working with our faculty to adopt open textbooks wherever possible. Open textbooks are a critical need that will enable our students to major in fields where textbooks are currently too expensive for them to purchase. What we are seeing, and this is a reality, is that we cannot retain students in the STEM fields. They're switching their majors because they cannot afford the textbooks in those areas. So once again, having open in all of these areas is important. It's important if we're going to continue to grow the STEM community and make it available widely to everybody. It's important if we are going to keep the knowledge moving forward at as rapid a pace as we possibly can. I applaud the work that you're doing over these next few days and over the coming years to tackle the many issues surrounding open access publications. Issues such as funding models, peer review, promotion and tenure reform, impact factors, and the other issues that you are going to be working on today and throughout this week and even when you leave here are all key to addressing how we move to a more open environment for publications. So I invite you to enjoy your time at GW, enjoy the city, and do good work. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Banu Nuping. Many of you already know him. He oversees UNESCO's open efforts and was part of the original cohort that helped make OSI possible. It goes back in 2014 when we first started discussing what to do. Please smile. In early 2015, we decided, well, wouldn't it be great if we had an annual series of meetings about open access and about how to improve it? And Robin said, yeah, I'll do it. And so thanks to UNESCO and him, we're here. So
thank you so much, Glenn. In fact, a year and a half ago, when I first started discussing with Glenn about whether or not we should embark on a 10-year-long difficult sort of journey to unravel various facets of open scholarly communication processes. I didn't know that we would be here at that time. So I'm being very honest with you. But here we are. And I think, I'll take this opportunity to say that, our support will be with an open scholarly initiative for the next, at least, for 4 or 5 years. And after that, I think it will become a self-rolling and self-propelling mechanism and move forward at its own pace. Anyways, distinguished participants, welcome to the second edition of OSI. Today's world in which economic security, the right to education, and the benefit from digital innovations are not enjoyed by all, the Sustainable Development Goals represent a universally adopted multi-sectoral strategic vision for change. A year and a half ago, again, another very phenomenal thing happened. The world accepted Sustainable Development Goals as the new indicator or target that the world wanted to achieve by 2030. At least 10 out of these 17 goals which were agreed in 2015, and as many as 38 indicators or concrete targets are interlinked in some way or the other with access to information and knowledge. As debated by the United Nations at the launch of the SDGs in September 2015, the openness and interconnectedness has great potential to accelerate human progress to bridge the digital divide and to develop knowledge societies. The Global Sustainability Report, which was published last year in September 2016, resonated the need for openness in various knowledge transaction processes. And what I had done was, I had in fact provided the outcome of OSI 2016, and some of my colleagues utilized the knowledge that all of us essentially derive out of our 2016 OSI conference. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development therefore now officially recognizes the need for more transparent, open, and equitable sharing mechanisms for knowledge. Achievement of SDG will require a continuous access to quality data and shared research knowledge. Access to knowledge is a global challenge requiring global solutions. Engaging the wider digital ecosystem of private and public sectors, civil society, as well as international organizations like UNESCO. It is truly an inclusive process. To quote Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development, this collaboration will be essentially in 4 areas. And they are to enhance coverage, improve affordability, create digital skills, and support exchange of scientific and locally relevant knowledge. Amidst these global challenges, an inclusive and community-driven process such as open scholarly initiative is very timely and very important. Starting this year, the outcome of OSI will be directly fed into the International Day for Universal Access to Information, which falls on 28 September every year. This is UN adopted a day for International Day for Universal Access to information. Your deliberation and conclusions will thus be fed directly into a political process. This year's International Day will be celebrated in Mauritius and will primarily focus Africa. So whatever you will derive from your deliberation will be fed into International Day, which will be celebrated we have already got confirmation from about 3 presidents from Africa, including Ellen Shirley. She will attend. President of Mauritius, she will attend. President of Seychelles, he is attending. So it will be a very star club. And these very important political process we carry the message that you will all synthesize and produce. So it's a very proud moment for all of us. UNESCO will therefore not only continue to support OSI, but it will also ensure how it can be made more relevant to the countries of the South. This provides a bigger responsibility on your shoulders. You will not only have to discuss the topic in your work group to advance its frontiers, but you will also have to decide and debate on how your discussions can be made much more meaningful to Africa and other countries in the South. I take this opportunity to thank Glenn, my good friend, for being a great colleague, and National Science Communication Institute for being a great partner of UNESCO in driving this process. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob. The last speaker this morning, before I bore you with the details, very pleased to have Vince Cerf here. When I emailed you guys and said that Vince was going to be speaking, I probably received a dozen fan mail letters, wondering how in the world we managed to get you here. Mike Van Wert, who was a delegate last year, the executive director of the National Science Board, I guess happens to know you, and Mike and Chris Ertzman were talking in the spring about if it would be possible to maybe get Nick here to speak, and next thing you know, it turns out that he has an interest in what we're doing here, so I'm very pleased that he's able to be here. I explained to him this morning I'm not going to read you his entire bio because it would take too long. The short version is he's the vice president of Google and co-founder of the internet. So that just
Well, the good news is that I'm not going to use any PowerPoint. You know, the power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. So I'm going to avoid that. It means you have to listen. Second, I have to tell you that when I was invited to come to OSI 2017, I had this frisson reaction because I had a battle with something called the Open Systems Interconnection Model versus TCP/IP during a 15-year period from about 1978 to 1993. Ultimately, the Internet protocols succeeded, but not before a lot of Sturm und Drang. So fortunately, I learned that this was open scholarship and not open systems interconnection. Some of the things that Geneva mentioned, I resonate very strongly with. And so I thought what might be useful is to just go through some desiderata, which I hope during the course of your working groups over the next few days you will consider, evaluate, and maybe come up with some recommendations. Because most of what I have to say tends to be along the problem direction as opposed to the solution direction. I think this is a tough problem. So let me start out by making a few observations about why there are problems and what kinds of desirable properties we want the solutions to have. One of them, I think, is to preserve the quality of the publications. It's very important. If we want to make things open and freely available and maybe even free, then we have to be cautious about assuring that the quality is still there. And it costs something to assure quality. There's a second issue, and that has to do with reducing the incentive for quantity versus quality. And many of you who are part of the academic world or have been part of it or are engaged with it will recognize that many people who are seeking academic advancement feel compelled this is the publisher-perish problem, feel compelled to produce more and more papers. And what happens is that there's probably a finite amount of quality in the universe, is sort of the conservation principle, and so it gets divided among a larger and larger number of papers until, on the average, every paper has no quality at all. It's sort of like television channels, and cable television is a good comparison. It's a serious issue, though. Finding a way to reward academics for their work in some ways other than quantity, I think is terribly important and not necessarily easy. It's plain that in order to achieve that objective, the comment that Geneva made about peer review and the evaluation of quality of publication is essential, because we have to reward people for the quality of their work, not its quantity. Another thing which I think is increasingly important in the scientific and academic domain is to increase the reproducibility of the research. We're already discovering over and over again, I would say, especially on the health side or biological research, that a lot of experiments that produce results are not necessarily reproducible. And this leads to some very serious side effects, one of which is coming to the wrong conclusions and making choices based on what in effect is not reproducible work. But it also leads to a lot of flip-flopping back and forth. And one of the, to go off on a tangent for a moment, one of the things which I find most difficult about trying to convey scientific fact, or conclusions anyway, to the general public, is that a scientist is responsible for developing theories and then doing experiments to validate the theory. And the thing that we're trained to do is to recognize that if the experiments don't validate the theory, we are obligated to fix the theory to match the results. There are parts of our social environment, our society, that are unsettled by this notion that you might assert something about your theory and the data that supports it, and then change your mind 10 years later because you've discovered something new. There is a kind of absolutist element in our society that thinks that once you've established a fact that it can't possibly change, and if you change it, then you can't be relied upon, you must be lying all the time. And so we have a serious problem in the scientific world to assure that people understand this dynamic in the scientific disciplines, which means, again, that the quality of the work has to be very high to avoid the possibility that somebody could point to publications and say it's obvious that that's garbage data or it's fake data or whatever else it is. So we have this huge obligation not only for high quality but for reproducibility of the results. Now, how do we achieve the reproducibility? Well, what that means is maintaining access to data from the experiments, access to software and other mechanisms that were used to produce that data and to analyze the data. And that might include source code of programs that were used for analytic or simulation purposes. The implication of that is that while you're considering this question of open scholarship, it can't just be fixed publications of the classic, paper variety. This has to be broadened to include a lot of other elements that are part of important scholarship. So that means that preservation becomes a big issue. This is an area where I have become increasingly distressed that a lot of the material that we either produce or use to generate our academic publications is increasingly in digital form. And that preserving digital material is actually a lot harder than it sounds. A lot of people have this implicit belief that bits don't die because somehow they're ethereal and they'll last forever. But they're actually encoded in physical ways. So the media that contain those digital bits may in fact not be readable 100 years from now or even 10 years from now. Or even if the bits are still there in the medium, you can't find a reader for it. Find somebody that can still read a 5 1/4 inch floppy disk or a 3 1/2 inch floppy disk. How about the, I'm going to pick on Apple for a minute, the MacBook Pros that don't have a CD reader anymore, and you have a stack of CDs, because that was a great way of preserving stuff. So we have some serious technical problems preserving digital content. It gets worse. Let's imagine that a lot of the digital objects that you create in the course of your work, whether it's documents or spreadsheets or programs and things like that, require software to be correctly interpreted. Well, software comes in several flavors. There are application programs, and they typically run in the context of an operating system running on top of a piece of hardware. It's entirely possible that the hardware of the future won't run the old operating systems or the old applications that are needed to interpret the digital objects that you've been carefully preserving. And some of us have already experienced this with something as simple as phonographs, where the encoding mechanism is no longer recognized by the latest version of the photograph management software that you happen to be using, or maybe you try to import an image into a presentation program, and you get a little note saying, I don't recognize what this is, sorry, what's TIFF, or what's PNG? And we're saying, it's a picture, damn it, I had an experience, to pick on Microsoft for a minute, trying to, I know it's our favorite company, but I have some old 1997 PowerPoint files, and I tried to pull one of them in just to look at it in a more recent Microsoft PowerPoint program, and it said, what's this? And, I'm sitting here screaming at the machine, it's a PowerPoint file, you dumbass. So, I think we have a really serious problem here, and that's figuring out how to preserve digital content over long periods of time. The reason that's important in the academic world, especially in the scientific world, is that that data may very well be needed in order to validate new theories about what's going on. A dramatic example of this is our discovery, Brownian's discovery, that the universe isn't just expanding, it's accelerating. And the best way to have understood that is to go back and look at the data that we collected before and see this over a period of decades. If we didn't have that data available, it's harder, or we'd have to wait to gather more data. So this is a big issue. So digital preservation has become, for me, a major issue. And I'm hoping it will become a major issue for companies like Google as well. In fact, the National Science Foundation has recognized this problem. They have the Research Data Alliance program, which is run by Fran Berman, and that program is intended to find ways of preserving all manner of digital content, including documentation and metadata and software and so on. Another thing that Geneva mentioned very briefly in her remarks had to do with what I would call sustainable business models. And if we are in fact eager, as I think all of us in the room are, to make our research content and research results more widely available and more affordably available, we still have to recognize that this is not zero cost. Some people will point to archive, for example, as an example of a very low-cost place to store away a great deal of content. But it's my understanding that those are pre-publication or post-publication documents that have already gone through the editing process and all the other things that make these things useful and readable. And the consequence of that is that some of the costs associated with the publication is not contained within the archive system, it's elsewhere. And we still have to account for that. And of course, sustainability is an important element. I'll give you an example from personal experience. I used to be the president of the Association for Computing Machinery. And when you undertake that position, the first thing you start looking at is the budget to figure out how do I keep the institution going. And I discovered very quickly that the digital library program at ACM accounted for 1/3 of its entire annual budget. So it was sustaining some of the operations, some of the revenue from the digital library covered not only the absolute cost of the library itself and everything else, but some of the other works that the Association for Computing Machinery undertook to pursue. And so the idea that we should do away with the charges for the digital library wasn't a sustainable idea. And there are some of you I'm sure have been through these battle after battle over open source, open access, free access, open source, et cetera, and the struggle to figure out how to make that work and still be able to sustain the business of publication. And I don't have very good answers to that, except to suggest to you that adding functionality to publication might, in fact, make a difference. So let me give you an example of that. This is an example that a young man named Brett Victor demonstrated at a National Academy of Engineering event that I hosted on the West Coast at the Computer History Museum. Brett is a proponent of software that exhibits what it's doing while it's doing it. So if you're writing a program and it produces some kind of visible output, he likes to have the program show its output while you're doing the editing of the program. Of course, you have to wait until it's, the program makes sense. You can't do it halfway through a line of code. But his idea is that he wants to give the programmer some feedback as to what has just happened as a consequence of writing a line of code. Well, he's extended this notion, and the demonstration he made was a publication, a paper that he wrote, which had elements in it like charts and figures that were interactive. And so while you were reading the paper, you were free to fire up a simulation, for example, and change some of the parameters to see what the results were. So the paper was essentially allowing you to exercise the researcher's models and explore some of the spaces that maybe the paper didn't particularly look at. This is actually a non-trivial digital object. It's a very complex piece of code in a way. And so it's not necessarily within all of our grasp to write such a thing. But the reason I was taken so much by this is, first of all, it allowed researchers to explore in a way that was almost like a partnership with the author, as opposed to simply listening to reminiscences. But the second thing that it did was to reinforce my belief that preserving complex digital objects is going to be really important if, in fact, this is a practice which catches on. So the notion of publication, I think, needs to be much more broad than we have traditionally treated it, which is a fixed document printed in a fixed medium. So, actually, you guys gave me like half an hour. Everybody else was being very terse. And so we started at something like 9:15, and I actually don't particularly want to bore you with more stuff. So now we have a problem because you scheduled this until 10 o'clock. So I have a question for you. What the hell do you want to do for the next half hour? I mean, I'm like every other old Stanford professor, right? You could wind me up and I could talk 50 minutes on anything, even if I don't know anything about it. But I don't want to just stand up here and bore people. I would like to ask a few questions, though, if that's okay. And maybe even get into a little Q&A. Is it in fact the case that I'm the last guy before you get started, or do you have more stuff?
I just have to go over the details.
You have to go through the details. Well, why don't we just do a little bit of back and forth, if that's okay? Now, I'm risking one thing. I'm hearing impaired, right? So I'm the guy that came to talk and wouldn't listen. So I'm going to try, we'll try to make this work. Do we have a roving microphone, or? Great. Okay, so since we don't do that, I will be the roving microphone. So, okay, warning for the guys with the cameras, I'm jumping off the stage with the microphone. And I'll run around like we're all this also makes this is a shtick, right? And the reason it works is that if I have to lip read, I'm close enough to you because I'm handing you the microphone. So let me just first of all, invite questions or assertions, statements, or something that you think should be heard before you meet in working groups. And I'll start just by asking a question about free versus something else. How important is it to you that all of the results of the research be literally available for free as opposed to openly available? And I know that's been a source of real tension, but I would like to understand whether there is still tension about that or even some idea for how to cope with the fact that absolutely free doesn't make a whole lot of sense because of the need to sustain infrastructure to continue the publication process. So let me start with that, and if you prefer you want to talk about something else, that's okay too. So first, make sure you introduce yourself so that we know who to blame when you say something silly.
Hi, I'm Richard Price, the founder of Academia.edu. I want to come back to your remarks about reproducibility. It's a great topic, and you mentioned it's a big problem. We need to address it. You mentioned one path is to encourage academics to share data, which they're not doing right now. And there's a huge antipathy towards sharing data. It takes an awful lot of time to prepare the data set. You're worried that someone will find a problem with your paper, and so there's just pure downside risk and no upside. You're hoping to milk your data set for 5 more publications, so why share it now? And then coming back to another point, there's just no upside. There's no sort of like publication in Nature that will get you any credit in the 10-year review process or the grant review process. So I was wondering, given these headwinds against data sharing practices that have been prevailing for decades, how can we address them? How can we build a system where academics jump out of bed in the morning and think, I obviously want to get published in Nature, I want to share this data set?
So, first of all, it's a very good question. I've always found that when you want somebody to do X, for some value of X, and they see it as extra work and not something that helps them, then they will resist. If, on the other hand, we create tools and frameworks that make it much easier for people to capture their data and make it shareable, and reward them for doing that. Now, the question is, what is the nature of that reward? It might have to do with whether you get published. There could be a set of publications which don't accept papers in the absence of shared data, in the absence of shared software. This, in a sense, puts the researcher on a fairly high plane and also a hurdle to jump over, because in order to publish in such a way, you have to be pretty confident in what you've done. Because you're basically going to expose yourself to someone else trying to reproduce your experiment and either succeeding or failing, or maybe even exposing manipulated information, which becomes visible if you're actually looking at the data. So it's potentially a risky proposition, but on the other hand, if in our academic community, you get more points for having published that way, that you are being more true to the academic dictum of sharing your information and allowing other people to reproduce your results, then maybe there is some incentive there. This word incentive, by the way, is another important one. Whenever you see behavior that you don't like and you wish to change it, the only way you're going to succeed is to understand the incentives that led to that behavior and then ask, how can I change the incentives? Any other argument doesn't work. You have to have incentives to make people do something different from what they're currently doing. And so in this conference and these discussions, if we want to change the way in which things are published and the openness of that publication, we're going to have to dig deep into the incentives that drive the present system and understand them well enough to figure out, first of all, how would they have to change in order to make this openness work better, and then what steps would we have to take in order to make those changes. Okay, other topics. Wow. This is part of my health plan.
Hi, Ben. Joan Lippenkopf, Coalition for Network Information. I'm going to go back to your original question, which is, do people believe that information, scholarly, scientific information, should be free or freely available? And I think that for the people in this room, and you can throw your napkins at me if I'm wrong, there's certainly a recognition that there are costs to publication and to quality publication. The question is what economic model or models would make more sense than what we currently have. And I think it's a big emphasis of this conference and of other groups who are working on this set of issues. And there's no clear answer yet in my mind, but there are a lot of pilots and projects and models already out there. But for example, APCs, where the author or authors pay to make something open access, often that can come out of their grant funds if they have grants. Libraries taking on publishing activities using a publishing platform to work with editors, often on their campus, to make available content that that editor is working on in his or her field. So I think that the question is, where do the subsidies go? Because right now, in the academic world, the libraries, through the university funds, are paying this huge amount for their publications, and is there a better way to allocate all of those resources to make a more generally open access?
So I won't pretend to try to actually answer that question, but I will argue that that's a working group discussion that's worthy of your attention. I will also make one other observation, though. We're back to incentives for just a minute. Think for a moment, I will insult some of the publishers in the room, and it's all intentional. A publisher's incentive is to generate revenue from the publication, and so the more publications there are times the number of subscribers increases revenue. And so getting more and more publications is an incentive for a publisher. And I'm sure those of you who run libraries are well aware of the large number of publications that come out, even just in the scientific space. I mean, these are numbered in the tens of thousands, as I understand it. So there is a kind of disincentive to achieve higher quality with lower quantity, because part of the incentive is to generate revenue. And I'm not trying to say that the publishers are just horrible money grubbers, blah, blah, blah. But I am saying that there is some built-in incentive there. And so we're back to some very fundamental notion, which is how do I change the incentives? That doesn't entirely answer your question, but it would reduce the cost of the library if there were fewer publications that the library had to keep track of. So let me get 1, 2, and 3 over here. So here's number 1.
I'm John Dove, I'm in the at-large group, and I just had a comment to make about free, and then I wanted to ask 2 questions about reproducibility. So you seem to imply that free is not sustainable. Our societies in the European world and in our world, education in the U.S. is free through K-12, and in the EU it's often free through graduate school. So I think that societies can organize activities that are actually free and sustainable, but it does need to be able to have contribution of money. Somebody is paying for sure. Absolutely, absolutely. So, but it can be free to the consumer. So now the 2 questions I had about reproducibility, I thought you had really good comments, and I just wondered if there were a couple of other areas you might want to add to it. Now, you're like me, I often say I'm bilingual in not just English but geek, but in my case it's ancient geek. so indeed, I have a friend who was like one of the best game producers for the Apple IIe, and he realized, very creative guy, and he realized that his grandchildren were never going to be able to see his games or appreciate them in any way, so he became a furniture maker instead. Yes, so I know there are facilities that try to replicate some of these old machines, but I wonder whether also in some areas of research, and maybe other people here know, how important are things like retention of chemical substances that are used in experiments? Is that something that also is needed to be archived in a way that then can be used for reproducibility?
Actually, that's quite interesting. I hadn't thought about the reagent problem. And I don't know the answer to that. I will tell you about the Apple IIe, however, because I was a big Apple IIe fan, and I played all the Infocom games and that Zork and everything else. And those have been reproduced. Somebody has managed to build a software platform that lets you run the old Infocom codes. And, it was no bang bang shoot 'em up. It was just text. and you had to solve a bunch of problems, and some of the geeks in the room will remember plug and X, Y, Z, Z, Y, and all those special commands. Okay, who's number 2? Over here, thank you, okay.
Well, it just so happens it's fortunate that I'm number 2. I'm William Gunn, and I work at Elsevier, but I've been working on the reproducibility project with the Center for Open Science and Science Exchange, and I know the answer to that question about reagents and stuff. In fact, there are repositories for antibodies, for cell lines, for strains, and these are places that serve really 2 great functional roles, which are probably relevant to data as well, in that not only do these places kind of have a business model where they can store the data, but you don't have to go and get in contact with the original person and say, hey, do you still have this sample in your freezer somewhere, and are you willing to share it? You go to these people and you pay them a fee for their archival storage, and you get it, and there's no like, should I share this or not question that's built in there. So that's just a response to yours. What I was going to say was, I think a question that probably every group in here is going to end up touching on at some point is this sort of fuzzy notion of infrastructure. In the internet, it's pretty clear what infrastructure is. You have your routers and your switches and cable, right? In the scholarly world, we talk about infrastructure, but it's very fuzzy kinds of things. I mean, are libraries infrastructure, or are we talking about, repository software? Is that infrastructure? At what level does something go from being an infrastructure to an end user service? And I wondered if, you had any kind of, if you ran into that kind of fuzzy definition of infrastructure and how you kind of draw the line there.
So the answer is yes. I think it's a good observation that infrastructure is a wonderful term because it, at least from my point of view, it helps me think about what are the conditions that have to be satisfied in order to get something to work. And sometimes the answer is a certain kind of infrastructure, like electricity, for example, or the internet itself, or the World Wide Web. So I think that in the academic world, libraries are infrastructure. And we rely very much on that notion of infrastructure. When Carnegie started underwriting the cost of libraries, there was a big battle with the publishers who were concerned that there would be, publish one book and then everybody would borrow it from the library. And that ultimately got resolved. And ironically, I think that book sales in particular have continued to grow, whether they're physical books or online, soft copy books. That's still been a major operation. So here I think we ought to be asking ourselves, what kind of infrastructure would we need in order to sustain, for example, low-cost access to academic research content? And I use those words to include everything, including software and everything else. I want to make one observation about the software repository idea. A number of organizations are starting to preserve software. What they run into is an interesting problem because that software sometimes has intellectual property rights associated with it. So the question is, okay, you can store it away, but I don't want you to let anybody use it. Or at least not until the patents have run out or whatever other intellectual property constraints have run out. And it gets very complex because if you had an operating system, for example, and you stored it away, and you said 20 years have gone by, can we let everybody use it? And the answer might be, well, no, because half of it has been reproduced in the most recent version of the software, and therefore we still have rights to it, and you can't share that with anybody. And so there's this tension, and I'm not 100% sure how we're going to resolve that. In the digital preservation space, this is already turning out to be a big headache. If I want to save the operating systems and the application code that I might need to correctly interpret a digital object, 100 years from now, how do I know when it's okay to do that? Or, alternatively, should we expand the copyright laws and maybe the patent laws to say that for digital preservation purposes, there are rights that libraries and other repositories should have in order to sustain this reproducibility idea, the ability to reuse or apply older software. So I'm not quite sure where we will come out on that. But we do have to resolve that problem, because again, we see another piece of incentive and tension between what we would like to have happen and what people see as their rights. Where's number 3? Over here, thank you.
By the way, on the subject of licenses, there's a funny one if you've ever heard of it, WTFPL. Do what the F you want to public license. That's pretty cool. But I also want to recommend a book called Roads and Bridges, The Unseen Infrastructure. It's by Nadia Iqbal from GitHub. And I thought that was a really good publication. So my question to you is, I think, I thought William might actually ask this question, but about trust.
Wow.
And so it actually was inspired by the first question. When you're developing these platforms, you talked about all these sort of incentives, try to help researchers do things more efficiently. And so these platforms invite researchers in and have, with the premise of open. And then what happens later on is they, in some of these cases we've seen, people find that their information is being mined, there are things being done with their information, and they pull it out. And, they flee from platforms, and because of that trust issue, because it wasn't described to them maybe initially, or they just didn't, turn the other way.
About that? So actually, trust is a huge word, and it's one that I think every one of you must have somewhere in the back of your mind about a lot of things, not just this one case, but about institutions in general. There's a great deal of concern now that in our society, trust is diminished in many different dimensions: trust of other people, trust of our institutions, our governments, et cetera, et cetera. And so reestablishing trust is a very important and huge challenge right now. In the specific case that you're talking about, at Google, for example, one of the things that we've adopted is a rule that says if you put information into our system, you can get it back. And so there's a takeout policy. I think we need to do more work to make that mechanically easier to do, maybe to transfer into a different cloud. If you have a petabyte of data sitting at Google and you can sip it at a straw at 10 megabits a second, that's not very helpful. So if you really wanted to move it to AWS, you want a 100 gigabit pipe to do that. So I think that there's a double whammy in what you're asking. One of them has to do with reestablishing trust that data is protected, and access controls are appropriately applied, and the company itself is not abusing its trust in holding the data. But the other one, which is related, is that if you created a framework or an infrastructure, if you like, a component of infrastructure that helps the researcher, and then for some reason you decide that that's not sustainable, your business model didn't work, and you stop, and there were a whole bunch of people depending on that, that's another big problem. And it makes me worried, frankly, because companies have to be sustainable or they will go away anyway. And so you can't just discard this question of sustainability, but at the same time you run into this risk that if you create something that everybody is very attracted to, wants to make use of, and then you can't sustain it anymore, then there's a lot of damage done. And so this is another conundrum that the working groups will have to struggle with. I think it's very clever of me to show up at the beginning and then to escape before any of the working groups happen and just leave you with this problem sitting on the table. But I do appreciate very much the opportunity to join you today, and I wish you well in the next couple of days. Thanks very much.